Ever bought a cheap mini PC that promised a sleek office setup, only to watch it crawl when you open a spreadsheet or try a video call? I've been there, the regret of spending a few dollars on a budget desktop that can't keep up with everyday tasks, and then having to scramble for a replacement a month later. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. That feeling of hesitation is why I spent a good chunk of time comparing the Lenovo IdeaCentre Mini against a handful of lower-priced alternatives before I hit record. The question I kept asking myself was simple: does this little box actually give me the peace of mind I need, or is it just another flashy spec sheet waiting to disappoint? First off, let's talk about the category itself. Mini desktops sit at the crossroads between a full-size tower and a laptop. They're supposed to deliver the power you'd expect from a traditional desktop, but in a footprint that fits on a bookshelf or even a narrow desk edge. The trade-off usually shows up in three places: heat management, expandability, and the ability to handle multiple workloads without throttling. When you throw an Intel i7-13700H with 14 cores into a chassis that's barely larger than a coffee mug, you're banking on clever engineering to keep temperatures low and performance steady. In the real world, that means you should be able to run a couple of browser tabs, a Zoom call, a light Photoshop edit, and maybe even a small game without the fan whining into your ears. So, who should actually consider this machine? If you're a freelance graphic designer who needs a reliable Windows 11 Pro environment for Adobe apps, but you don't have the space for a tower, the IdeaCentre Mini checks a lot of boxes. It also makes sense for remote workers who want a dedicated work computer that can stay on 24/7 without taking up a whole desk. The 24GB of DDR4 RAM gives you enough headroom to keep a few heavy applications open, and the 1TB M.2 SSD means you're not constantly fighting for storage when you start dealing with large media files. On the other hand, if you're a hardcore gamer looking to push 1440p frame rates or a data scientist who runs massive simulations, you'll likely feel the limits of the Iris-Xe graphics and the lack of a discrete GPU slot. The Mini is not built for those high-intensity workloads. From a practical standpoint, the first thing I noticed after unboxing was how quickly the system boots into Windows 11 Pro. The SSD is fast enough that you're not waiting for a loading screen the way you might with older SATA drives. I set up a dual-monitor workflow using the Thunderbolt 4 port, and the connection was seamless: no flicker, no lag, just a crisp 4K display on the second monitor. That kind of connectivity is a real strength because it gives you the flexibility of a laptop dock without having to buy a separate docking station. I also tested the built-in Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth 5.2 by streaming a 1080p video while transferring a few gigabytes of files from a NAS. The connection held steady, and there was no noticeable drop in video quality. Heat is often the silent killer for mini PCs, and it's where many cheap alternatives stumble. During a 2-hour intensive session with Photoshop, Illustrator, and a couple of Chrome tabs full of research PDFs, the chassis stayed surprisingly quiet. The fans ramped up just enough to keep the CPU temperatures in the mid-70s Celsius, which is respectable for a compact design. I did notice that after about 90 minutes, the fan noise became a low hum that you could still hear if you were sitting right next to the unit, but it never turned into an obnoxious whine. That's a realistic weakness to flag. If you need a completely silent office environment, you might still need to look at a slightly larger case with a more robust cooling solution. Another practical point is the lack of upgrade paths. The Mini packs a 14-core i7-13700H, which is a mobile processor. That means you can't swap it out for a higher-tier chip later on. The 24GB of RAM is soldered, so you're stuck with that amount for the life of the machine. For many users, that's fine. You get more than enough memory for multitasking today, and the SSD can be upgraded if you need more storage. But if you like the idea of future-proofing by adding RAM or a dedicated GPU later, this form factor won't accommodate it. It's a hidden trade-off that you only discover once you start thinking about long-term scaling. Let's bring this back to real-world usage. I set the Mini up as a home office hub for my wife, who runs a small e-commerce shop. She uses Shopify, runs product photos through Lightroom, and hops on video calls with suppliers. Over a week of daily use, the machine never hiccuped, orders processed, photos edited, and calls held without any lag. The only hiccup came when she tried to export a 30-minute video at 4K resolution, the Iris say.